There is a country in South America that almost nobody talks about. Not because anything went wrong there, not because it is dangerous or unstable or difficult to reach. Quite the opposite. Uruguay is, by most measurements, one of the safest, most stable, most livable countries in the entire Western Hemisphere. It has functioning institutions, clean water and reliable electricity, a healthcare system that works, the highest fiber optic internet penetration in Latin America, roads that are maintained. And yet most people, if you ask them to point to Uruguay on a map, would hesitate. They know it is somewhere between Argentina and Brazil. Beyond that, the detail gets uncertain. Part of the reason is the numbers. Uruguay is roughly the size of the state of Missouri, or slightly larger than England. It has 3.5 million people. That is not a large number for a country of that size. The population density is roughly 20 people per square kilometer. For context, England has 280. The Netherlands has 423. Uruguay has 20. Drive through the interior of Uruguay and you will understand that number viscerally. Miles of green rolling hills with nothing on them except grass and cattle and the occasional eucalyptus tree planted in a row. Small towns spaced far enough apart that the road between them feels, for long stretches, entirely without human reference. Estancias, the large cattle ranches that have defined this landscape for 3 centuries, sitting at the end of dirt tracks that disappear into the green. Nearly 60% of all Uruguayans live in or around Montevideo, the capital city on the southern coast. The rest of the country, the vast majority of its physical territory, exists at a density that the modern world has largely moved away from. Not because it is inhospitable, because the people left. And now, quietly, without announcing itself, Uruguay is beginning to receive people moving the other direction. Retirees from the United States, from Germany, from France, from the United Kingdom. People who have spent their working lives in dense, expensive, complicated cities and who have begun, in the second half of their lives, to ask a question that Uruguay seems unusually well-positioned to answer. What would it feel like to live somewhere that leaves you alone? This is Uruguay, the country that barely shows up on the map of the world's conversation and which is, for exactly that reason, becoming one of the best-kept secrets in the Americas. To understand why Uruguay has only 3.5 million people in a territory the size of England, you have to understand what Uruguay is made of. Uruguay is almost entirely grassland. The technical term is temperate grassland, or in the regional context, the pampas, the vast, deep-soiled rolling plain that stretches across southeastern South America in one of the most ecologically productive but visually understated landscapes on Earth. There are almost no mountains. There are no jungles. There is no mineral wealth in the ground worth extracting at scale. There is grass, there is cattle, there is the river. The Rio de la Plata, the River of Silver, though it carries neither silver nor particularly silver-colored water, forms Uruguay's southern border with Argentina, and opens into the South Atlantic in an estuary so wide that standing on one bank, you cannot see the other. Montevideo sits on its northern shore. Buenos Aires, the Argentine capital and one of the largest cities in the Americas, sits directly across the water, a short ferry ride away. The proximity is one of the defining facts of Uruguayan geography. Uruguay has always existed in the shadow of its much larger, louder neighbor. The country was never designed to hold a large population. It was colonized late and incompletely, contested between Spanish and Portuguese empires through the 18th century, and eventually emerged as an independent republic in 1828, in circumstances that had less to do with popular uprising than with the geopolitical convenience of having a buffer state between Argentina and Brazil. The economy that developed was based on what the land offered: cattle and wool, exported from a country that could produce enormous quantities of both with very little human labor. An estancia of 10,000 hectares can be managed by a handful of workers. The land does not need many people. It never did. And so, unlike the cities of Europe or the eastern seaboard of North America, Uruguay never developed the industrial base that would have drawn people from the countryside into dense urban centers in large numbers. Instead, the people left. Throughout the 20th century, economic crises, political instability during the dictatorship that governed the country between 1973 and 1985, and the simple gravitational pull of larger economies drew Uruguayans outward, to Argentina, to Brazil, to Spain, to North America. The emigration was significant enough that the Uruguayan diaspora, the people of Uruguayan origin living outside the country, is estimated to be comparable in size to a significant fraction of the domestic population. What was left behind was a country with good bones and a small population. Democracy restored in '85. Institutions rebuilt. An economy that, while modest, was among the most stable in Latin America. And a culture that had absorbed enough loss and enough hardship to develop what Uruguayans describe with understatement as a particular philosophical relationship to the pace of life. The grass is still there, the cattle are still there, the estancias are still there. And the question of what to do with all that space has been answered differently in the last 2 decades than in the century before. Uruguay has been called the Switzerland of South America for long enough that the comparison has become something of a cliché. Like most clichés, it contains more truth than its overuse has stripped from it. The comparison is not about mountains or watches or chocolate. It is about what Switzerland represents in the political imagination of a certain generation. A small country that decided to make stability its primary export, that built its institutions carefully and maintained them consistently, and that became, as a result, a place where things work, and people are generally left alone to live their lives without the government or their neighbors making that more complicated than necessary. Uruguay is, by most independent measurements, the most stable democracy in Latin America. Transfers of power have been peaceful across decades. The rule of law functions. Corruption, while not absent, operates at levels far below most of the region. The press is free. The courts are independent. Public services, water, electricity, internet are reliable in a way that anyone who has spent significant time in other parts of South America will recognize as genuinely distinctive. It was also, in 2013, the first country in the world to fully legalize and regulate the cannabis market at the national level, not as an experiment, but as a policy passed through a democratic legislature and implemented through state-regulated pharmacies. It was the second country in the Americas to legalize same-sex marriage. It has had a secular state since 1918, when church and state were formally separated, making it one of the earliest in the hemisphere to do so. For the retirees arriving from the United States and Europe, the practical package Uruguay offers is specific enough to have generated its own small industry of relocation consultants and expat forums. The healthcare system has a private tier called Mutualistas that provides access to a full care network for between $100 and $200 per month. Housing in Montevideo is significantly cheaper than comparable quality in any North American or Western European city. The climate is temperate 4 seasons, with mild winters and comfortable summers, without the hurricanes or earthquakes that affect much of the rest of the Americas. And then there is the tax question, which is the one that tends to appear first in any conversation about why specific people chose Uruguay. Uruguay operates a territorial tax system. Income earned outside Uruguay, a pension, a social security payment, rental income from a property in another country, dividends from an investment portfolio, is not taxed in Uruguay. A new resident arriving before 2026 received a 10-year holiday on all foreign source capital income. The rules adjusted slightly from 2026 onward, tying the holiday to certain local investment conditions, but the fundamental principle remained. Uruguay wants residents who bring their economic activity with them, and it is willing to let them keep the income they generate elsewhere. For a retired couple living on a U.S. pension and Social Security, the arithmetic is not complicated. They pay no Uruguayan tax on that income. Their health care costs a fraction of what U.S. private insurance would cost at equivalent quality. Their rent, particularly outside Montevideo in the smaller coastal towns that have become popular with foreign residents, is manageable on a retirement income that would be under significant pressure in California or London. Uruguay is not cheap in the way that some South American countries are cheap. It is in fact expensive by regional standards, but it offers something that cheap does not always provide: predictability. The kind of slow, reliable, undramatic stability that people who have spent decades in complicated places find in the second half of their lives to be exactly what they were looking for. Montevideo has a promenade. This fact sounds unremarkable until you see it. The Rambla runs for 22 kilometers along the city's entire southern coastline, from the old port in the east to the quiet residential neighborhoods in the west, lined with parks and beaches and viewpoints and the occasional outdoor gym, used at all hours by the entire social spectrum of the city in a way that most coastal promenades in the world manage for only a portion of their length. People walk the Rambla in the morning with their thermos of mate, the bitter, herbal drink that Uruguayans consume through a metal straw from a gourd they carry with them at all times, refilling it continuously from the thermos, offering it to friends they encounter, treating the act of sharing mate as a social ritual so embedded in daily life that it functions as both greeting and conversation at once. A person walking the Rambla with their mate at 8 in the morning is not doing anything unusual. They are doing what people here do. Montevideo has a population of about 1.5 million people, which makes it by far the largest city in Uruguay and also the smallest capital city in South America. Buenos Aires, directly across the river, has 15 million in its metropolitan area. Sao Paulo has 22 million. Montevideo's human scale is not accidental or underdeveloped. It is the city's most consistent quality, the sense that you can understand it, that it does not exceed the human ability to navigate it without specialist knowledge, that the neighborhoods are distinct and walkable and connected by a public transport system that works. The old city, Ciudad Vieja, sits on a peninsula jutting into the Rio de la Plata, its colonial architecture restored in patches and still crumbling in others, with the kind of productive imperfection that makes a neighborhood feel alive rather than curated. Street musicians play for the workers taking lunch at outdoor tables. The covered market, the Mercado del Puerto, serves cuts of beef grilled over open coals at long counters that have operated the same way since the 19th century. The harbor behind it still handles cargo. Pochitos and Punta Carretas, the residential neighborhoods east of the old city, are where many foreign residents settle, close enough to the center to access its institutions and restaurants and cultural life, far enough to have the quieter, tree-lined streets and apartment buildings with doormen that signal a different, more domestic quality of urban life. Rents here are higher than in the rest of the city and significantly lower than comparable neighborhoods in any North American or European equivalent. What the expats who have settled in Montevideo consistently describe as the adjustment, the thing nobody warned them about, is not the language or the food or the distance from family. It is the pace. Not the pace of service in restaurants, though that is slower than they expected. Not the pace of bureaucracy, though that tests patience. The pace of social life. Uruguay does not have a large English-speaking expat community in the way that Bangkok or Lisbon or Mexico City do. The people you will meet are Uruguayan, and Uruguayan social relationships develop slowly, with genuine warmth, but without the transactional speed of communities where everyone is a newcomer and needs to build a network from scratch. The expats who thrive in Montevideo are the ones who were not in a hurry to belong, who understood that the relationships worth having here take time, and who had decided somewhere in the second half of their lives that slow was acceptable. They walk the Rambla in the morning. They drink their mate. They do not rush. An hour east of Montevideo, the coast changes character. The city falls away, and the road runs through towns that exist primarily for the summer, the long southern hemisphere, summer of December, through February, when Uruguayans and Argentines descend on the beaches in volumes that temporarily transform these quiet places into something bustling and warm. Then, the season ends, the visitors leave, and the towns return to the people who live there year-round. Atlantida, La Paloma, Punta del Diablo, each with its own character, each significantly quieter in the months when the tourists are gone. Pine and eucalyptus forests, planted a century ago as windbreaks and beautification projects now form dense groves behind long, empty Atlantic beaches. The water is cooler than the Caribbean. The beaches are not the kind that fill with umbrellas. They are the kind where you walk for 20 minutes in either direction and see no one. Punta del Este sits at the eastern tip of Uruguay's southern coast, a peninsula that juts into the Atlantic with a harbor on one side and open ocean on the other. In season, Punta del Este is one of the most fashionable resort destinations in South America, drawing wealthy Argentines and Brazilians to its apartment towers and restaurants and beach clubs. Out of season, it is something else. A smaller, quieter, more honest version of itself, where the permanent residents of the off-season understand that they have something the summer crowds do not. Drive inland from any point on the coast, and within 30 minutes the sea disappears and the campo takes over. Campo is the Uruguayan term for the rural interior, not a pejorative, not a description of poverty, but a description of a specific kind of landscape and a specific kind of life that the country has organized itself around for 3 centuries. Rolling grassland, cattle, the occasional town of a few thousand people, built around a church and a plaza and the infrastructure of an agricultural economy, a grain elevator, a veterinary supply store, a cooperative. The estancias of the interior have become, in recent years, one of the unexpected attractions for a particular kind of visitor and resident. Some have been converted into boutique accommodation. Not the themed, performative version of rural life, but genuine working cattle ranches that have added a guest wing and offer the experience of an operation that continues to function whether guests are present or not. You wake up in the morning, and the gaucho, the horseman, the working cowboy of the southern cone, is already in the field. The cattle are already moving. The mate is already on. The gaucho is not a costume in Uruguay. He is the person who manages the land that feeds the country. The wide-brimmed hat, the loose trousers tucked into boots, the knife worn at the belt as a working tool rather than an affectation. These are the clothes of a job, worn because they work in the specific physical environment of the Uruguayan campo. The tradition of the gaucho culture, including its music and its particular relationship to horses, is protected and practiced in Uruguay with the kind of unself-conscious continuity that exists in places that have not needed to reconstruct a heritage because they never lost it. Between the coast and the campo and the small cities of the interior, Uruguay offers a country-sized range of environments for a population small enough that none of those environments is particularly crowded. For the people who come here in the second half of their lives, that combination, space, stability, a climate that is temperate without being extreme, a culture that is genuinely welcoming once you give it time, is the specific package they were looking for and did not know they could find in South America. Uruguay is not a paradise. If you speak to the expats who have lived here for 5 years or 10, they will give you a list of the things that test them. The bureaucracy can be slow and literal, requiring physical stamps and multiple visits to offices that operate on 19th century hours. The cost of imported goods, electronics, cars, certain foods is high because of protective tariffs and the simple logistics of shipping to a small market at the bottom of the world. The winter can be damp and gray, with a cold wind coming off the river that gets into your bones in a way that the temperature on the thermometer does not fully explain. It is a choice. Every country is a choice. The people who choose Uruguay are usually the ones who have done the math on what they are willing to trade. They trade the convenience of one-day delivery and 24-hour supermarkets for the safety of a society where their grandchildren can walk to the beach alone. They trade the excitement and variety of a global metropolis for the peace of a neighborhood where the shopkeeper knows their name after a month. They trade the complexity of a tax system that changes with every political wind for the long-term predictability of a territorial system that leaves their foreign income alone. Uruguay does not try to convince you. It does not advertise itself with the aggressive marketing of some Caribbean islands or European golden visa programs. It is simply there, offering a specific set of conditions that have remained consistent through global crises, regional instability, and economic shifts. There is a word that Uruguayans use to describe their ideal state of being. The word is tranquilo. It translates to quiet, or calm, or peaceful. But none of those words quite captures the weight it carries here. Tranquilo is a social value. It is the quality you look for in a neighbor, in a politician, in a business partner. It is the opposite of flashy. It is the opposite of anxious. Uruguay is a country that has decided, collectively, that there are things more important than maximum growth or global attention. It has built a society that is modest, stable, and remarkably decent. A country where the president drives an old Volkswagen Beetle and lives in his own house rather than a palace. A country where the richest people live in neighborhoods that look comfortable rather than exclusive. For the retirees who have found their way here, Uruguay is a quiet sort of rich. Rich in space, rich in time, rich in the kind of safety that allows you to leave your door unlocked in the small towns along the coast. It is the country that barely shows up on the map of the world's crises and dramas. And for the people who live here, that is exactly the point. Uruguay remains on the edge of the world's conversation, a quiet green buffer between giants, content with its anonymity. It is a reminder that sometimes the best places to live are the ones that the rest of the world isn't rushing to find. But while some places choose quiet stability, others are shaped by a singular, dramatic moment of destruction, left abandoned to the elements. In our next video, we travel to the opposite side of the Americas, to a town in Pennsylvania that was literally consumed from below, where a fire has been burning beneath the streets since 1962, turning a bustling community into a toxic ghost town. Join us next time as we explore the forgotten streets of Centralia. Thank you for watching The Map. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe, and we will see you in the next landscape.